EdTech Mondays Kenya is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in partnership with EdTech East Africa.
Hello and welcome to EdTech Mondays Kenya, a monthly series of conversations. My name is Moses Kemibaro, your host and moderator for the Kenya edition. This month we look at how digital literacy has become a crucial component of 21st century skills for all people. In the March 23 edition of EdTech Monday Kenya, we explored foundational literacy and numeracy, which is a child's ability to read basic texts, write clearly, and solve basic mathematics problems such as addition and subtraction. We discussed how technology can be a key enabler of foundational literacy and numeracy, and how hybrid models of learning can improve foundational learning outcomes. Foundational literacy and numeracy are essential skills for people to navigate the world around them. However, in a world that's increasingly digitized, where government services, banking, and many jobs require citizens to use digital tools, traditional literacy and numeracy are not enough. Digital literacy is required to exist in a digital society, successfully and safely. The Ministry of Education and the Ministry of ICT have both emphasized the importance of digital literacy for learners and citizens and are making large investments to ensure all Kenyans have the knowledge and skills to be able to navigate this new digital world. Since 2015, the Digital Literacy Program, the government's flagship e-learning initiative, has aimed to increase the digital literacy of learners through ICT integration in public schools. Additionally, digital literacy is one of the competency-based curriculum's 7 core competencies, signaling its importance to success in both learning and life. As we explore how digital literacy has become a crucial component of the 21st century skills for learners of all ages, to those watching today's EdTech Monday Kenya, we ask, what can be done to improve the development of digital skills for every learner at every stage? Please send your responses to edtechmonday@mastercardfdn.org or tweet using the hashtag EdTechMondayKE. I'm delighted to introduce our panel for today on this very important topic. Brian Kenor, Monitoring, Evaluation, Accountability and Learning Coordinator at Save the Children International, and Lillian Kawira Mutegi, Founder, Uptake Consulting. Our sign language interpreter is Rosa Molo. Brian, Save the Children has been working in schools and directly with youth throughout Kenya to empower them with digital literacy skills. What have you seen as the challenges of making digital literacy a reality for all stakeholders?
Save the Children has been implementing a lot of digital literacy programs, most of it targeting youths, some of it targeting children. Save the Children is also a rights-based organization that implement our program based on child rights principles. There are several challenges that we've experienced while implementing digital literacy programs. I would mention 3 that are more overarching. One is inadequate budget allocation for the regular primary schools. Remember that most of the learners in Kenya are within the primary school section. And you'll notice that the government provides funding for learners through the capitation grant. The capitation grant, as it stands right now, is 1,420 for each learner. And you'll notice that that is not sufficient to enable implementation of digital literacy. There's need for government to work together with stakeholders to see what is the other best way to ensure that the capitation grant is sufficient for implementation of digital literacy. You'll notice that capitation is also pegged on the number of students who are only enrolled officially into formal schools. That leaves out a lot more students or learners who are out of school. I would say that there are about 2.2 million learners who are out of school. There are other nomadic and pastoralist learners who are on the move and are not in formal schools. And there are other learners who are refugees, who stayed in the refugee camps and who are migrating. And therefore, these students don't have an opportunity to be included into the formal learning. And therefore, when you peg the capitation grant on the number of learners who are formally recruited into formal schools, it's then very difficult for us to include these other learners who are outside and are not in formal schools. And therefore, if you look at the exiting recommendations for the previous Parliamentary Committee on Education, one of the recommendations was that the new 13th Parliamentary Committee on Education Parliament should try look into how can we revise the capitation grant. And given that the first cohort of junior secondary students were coming in, then we need to look at how then do we provide provision for them. I would say once we look into the issue of capitation, that will be one key issue resolved to ensure that digital literacy is able to be implemented. I would say that the second problem we are facing in implementation of digital literacy programs is access to technology. Access to technology affects a lot of people and a lot of learners in Kenya. You'd find that access to technology, when you talk about access to technology, we're talking about access to ICT equipment, we're talking about access to internet connectivity, we're talking about access to power supply, and we're also talking about the maintenance of these ICT equipment that are sent to schools. Most of the people, learners in Kenya who come from the underprivileged and marginalized communities do not have a privilege to access this. I would take an example of a child in Wajir or in the arid and semi-arid areas of Kenya. These children do not have the privilege to enjoy the privilege that an urbanized youth or learner could enjoy. And therefore, they're limited in how they could access digital literacy and how they could enjoy this particular key competency as is in the competence-based curriculum.
I think it's so important and interesting that you've pointed out that, you know, the marginalized communities suffer probably the biggest lack of opportunity to acquire these digital literacy skills. And of course, we need to find ways of closing these gaps in unique and interesting ways. And I think that comes back to you, Lillian. Thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe you can tell us from your perspective, especially working with learners with disabilities, why are digital literacy skills so important, and how can they possibly empower and possibly improve the livelihoods of these people who are living with disabilities?
I will go back to what my panelists said about the digital divide. I think I could start that because he mentioned that there exists a digital divide between the marginalized communities and the urban areas, but also there's something also he has failed to mention that I think goes hand in hand with what you've asked, the digital divide that exists for learners living with a disability, especially in accessing digital literacy and digital learning as well. So digital literacy for learners living with a disability is very important for them. Why? Because it helps them to unlock the potential and talent that exists for them. It also helps them to overcome the digital divide that exists, to overcome the barriers that exist in their digital space. So, and also it can be used as a tool for empowering them, as a tool for advocating for them to have independence and also confidence. It can also be used as a motivation tool to lure them to enjoy learning, because again, we've identified that the challenges that exist in the traditional learning models, for instance, you'd identify like the teacher to child ratio is a big issue. I know the government is doing a lot to bridge that gap, but we are coming on board, especially as someone who is working around the inclusive EdTech space. We are coming along with products that are able to bridge this gap that exists, especially advocating for personalized learning. This is whereby we used artificial intelligence to be able to curate a specific learning curve for students. For instance, I know some of us are familiar to Netflix. When you have your Netflix account, it has that recommendation for you. This is because of the movies that you've watched, so it's able to tailor-make and suggest movies for you. The same goes for artificial intelligence and personalized learning. Learners are able to get content that is deemed fit for them, and especially for learners with a disability. This conversation is not even about the learners alone. This conversation is about all the stakeholders involved, the learners themselves, the educators. It also goes to the publishers, or rather the instructors, people who provide this content for learners. Do they understand the needs of these learners? Because it's one thing to empower these learners with digital literacy tools. It's another for them to have access to the digital learning content that is adaptable to them. That's also another conversation, because we can teach these kids how to access digital devices. We can teach these kids how to access online learning resources. But the question is there an availability? Is there an accessible content, relevant and affordable for these learners online? Are there digital devices that are accessible to their everyday need? For instance, we identified that especially in the traditional learning models, a lot of students suffer because, again, they're not given the attention by the teacher that they need. That's why you find that a lot of invisible disabilities goes unnoticed, because teachers are not able to identify every student's specific learning curve. But if we had a model whereby we've empowered the teacher and the learners in how to access the digital learning and digital literacy, then teachers are able to identify each individual learner's learning curve, learning path, how they perceive information, how they use this information, how they share among themselves as peers. Yeah, so these are very crucial conversation at this particular moment.
So Brian, I'll turn back to you. And as we look at this whole challenge of making digital literacy something that is commonplace and well accepted across Kenya, and bearing in mind that digital learning cannot happen without digital literacy, this is a massive undertaking. What do you think is needed to make this possible at scale across the country?
I believe to make digital literacy at scale in the country, there's need for multi-sectoral collaboration among partners and stakeholders. This involves partners, private sector partners, involves civil society organizations, and most importantly, it involves the government. There needs to be multi-sectoral collaboration and partnership to ensure that we're able to pull together resources to be able to ensure that the most marginalized child can be able to access education. Among the stakeholders, it is very key as well to involve youths in decision making. As we're developing protocols, as we're developing guidelines, as we're developing curricula for digital literacy, there is a need for us to involve youths from the word go, because these are the leaders of tomorrow. The moment we negate or we fail to involve them in this whole process, then therefore there's a gap that we are creating. Secondly, I would say that there's need for partners to come on board to enable development of content. You notice that for digital literacy, there's a lot of content that is needed. One, we need interactive videos. We need interactive videos to be uploaded to technological platforms. And therefore, this needs different stakeholders to come on board, be they local organizations or local companies, such as Uptake, that are doing good work. They should come on board and be able to create content together with Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, which is then approved and uploaded into our digital platforms. I would say that there's lack of consistency in the kind of digital literacy that we're delivering in different schools. And there's need for consistency, there's need for coherence. And this can only be done when partners come together and agree on a common set of content that we want to deliver to our schools. In that way, then we're able to take digital literacy at scale and create a greater impact.
And I think, again, going back to some of the sentiments shared by Brian regarding the role of teachers in making digital literacy a reality. Obviously, it's a massive undertaking in general to make digital literacy universal within Kenya. But as we come back to you, I think I'd like to understand from your point of view, what more needs to be done from a teacher perspective, especially when we're thinking about learners with disabilities, and how really to make digital literacy more front and center when it comes to addressing their needs.
There needs to be a collaboration for all the key stakeholders in the education ecosystem. And going by the teacher perspective in terms of digital literacy, one thing that I'll say is teachers need to have to be empowered with capacity building, because again, these teachers are the ones who are guiding these learners in digital skills. So teachers need to be empowered. And how do we do that? We do the empowerment through capacity building, through online programs where they are trained. And I know the government is doing a lot, especially with advocating for ICT skills for teachers. Teachers need to be empowered beyond capacity building. Again, because again, it goes now back to now the learning methodologies that they are going to use, the teaching methodologies. They need to be empowered beyond their capacity building. It needs to come from a place whereby government and private sector is empowering these teachers with the relevant, affordable, and accessible digital learning content. For instance, especially when it comes to learners with a disability, again, I mentioned something about invisible disabilities. There needs to be an awareness for that. There needs to be an awareness of how you identify such disabilities and how do you handle these learners. Also, there's a need for teachers to be supported with relevant content adaptable to each specific disability. For instance, you can't assume it's a one-size-fits-all, especially with digital content. Learners with a hearing impairment perceive information differently from visually impaired students. So what we are talking about in digital literacy and empowerment for teachers are teachers receiving the relevant information that is adaptable for different learners who are able differently. Again, it goes across even beyond capacity building, learning platforms, learning content. The teachers themselves, do they have access to devices? I appreciated what my panelists said, that statistics show that every teacher needs to have at least familiarity with learning devices, online resources, so that they are able now to use them and embed them in their teaching methodologies. So this discussion has started from a good point, and especially going back to COVID time, there was no learning as you know it was no more. Even other businesses were affected, and teachers relied a lot on online platforms. And this one, for lack of a better word, they were dragged through the mud to learn. There was a need for capacity building, for training for the teachers. Assuming a situation whereby these teachers never had an experience with a computer or a laptop or online resources. So you can imagine, if they are not empowered themselves, there is no way they're able to empower the learners. So it has to come down to the teachers. Are they empowered? Do they have the capacity? Do they have the knowledge? Do they have the motivation again to use these online learning platforms, online content? Again, we are coming from a place whereby we have these traditional teaching methodologies. We have the book, we have the blackboard. But if you look at countries, Western countries, they are using smart devices. They are using tablets. They are using Orbit readers. They are using Braille monitors. They are using sign language embedded videos on learning content. So we need to ask ourselves, what have we done to bridge the digital divide, and what else can be done?
And now, sorry, you had something to
maybe
add?
you can come in there, and thank you for those great addition, Lillian. I just want to build on the point of training. You notice that the current teacher curriculum that they go through the teaching, of course, it has included ICT training. And I think that was a very key component that the TSC introduced in teacher training, so that as a teacher goes into school, at least they had one particular unit that they did on ICT. And I think that is a key step in kicking off this particular training. And you notice that since 2015, we rolled out the digital learning program by the government. And I think as of 2020, about 90,000 teachers has been trained. So that is a very big plus for the government. And we wish that these particular efforts keep going on and on. I would want also to insist on a point that you've said about the ethical practices that the teachers are trained on. We assume that once these ethical practices around digital safety are trained to teachers, then they can cascade the same to the students. What do I mean by ethical practices? Here I mean the safeguarding risks that we need to take care of. There are a lot of digital risks that children can be exposed to once they are exposed to digital literacy and digital learning. One of them being cyberbullying. Cyberbullying might involve, child abuse, sexual abuse, and all that component of safeguarding. And therefore, there's need for stakeholders and government being the lead to develop a particular safeguarding mechanism to ensure that as we are rolling out digital literacy in our curriculum, how do we ensure that students are safe while using these digital literacy platforms? How do we ensure that a teacher can be able to identify a case of online abuse from a learner and be able to address that as early as possible? This means that stakeholders have to come on board, stakeholders from the child protection and the division or the Directorate of Children Services and other stakeholders who are relevant in this discussion, so that we can come up with we can chat away around how do we ensure that children are safe as we are rolling out these particular digital literacy programs.
And Lillian, finally, maybe you can give us in a brief, concise response how you feel the transition will be for Kenya with digital literacy.
I'm actually visualizing the whole idea of having learners in school impacted with 21st century digital skills. So I'm looking at a situation whereby we have instilled in these learners the mindset to have the entrepreneurial mindset from a young age, because they're creative, they're also collaborative, and then they're also innovative. So again, going back to the Kenyan employment issues that we are facing at the moment, We want to bring on board learners who have the skills to exist, to thrive in this technological world. Again, the world is really changing dynamically in terms of the tech that we have nowadays. So we want learners who are able to adapt to the ever-changing technological needs. We also want to empower learners with these skills so that they can take advantage of all the tech resources that are out there to solve some of the challenges that we are having as a nation and even in the sub-Saharan Africa. We want to have the next innovators come from Kenya, come from Africa, solving local problems by local entrepreneurs and innovators. So that is the kind of vision that I have for these young ones.
We also had a chance to visit a primary school in Nairobi to get a better understanding of how they managed to implement various digital literacy initiatives to improve learning outcomes for their learners. Let's have a listen.
Digital literacy has facilitated my delivery in class as a teacher. There are subjects that you cannot get the feedback immediately. But through digital platform, I'm able to give my parents immediate feedback by taking photos and taking videos of the things that their kids are doing here in school. And at times when I give them assignment to do at home, the same happens with the parents. They take their kids' work when they are doing, and the outcome of what they have done, they post them to me in my platform.
Some of the digital skills I have gained as a teacher, I've been able to communicate to my learners through the digital platforms concerning assignments and projects. I also communicate to their parents and their guardians on assignments and projects that they require to assist.
Digital literacy skills, they have really helped me to help my children to know how to read. There is a platform that we share books online, whereby we allocate a certain book to a different child. Then the parent will be able to get a notification that a book has been assigned for the child to read, maybe 2 or 3 pages. Then when the child has read and answered the questions after reading the book, I will get a notification that this child is able to read. Because if the child is not able to read, the notification that I will get is the child cannot go to the next step rather, because it means the child is stuck. So we will pick up from there when the child comes now the following day.
Once the homework has been sent, I go to my school account and I see the homework that has been sent. Depending on the work that you have been given, I am able to do it physically, online, or I can include my parents. Once I am done with the homework, I submit the work online, and the next day the teacher can be able to mark it online and give us feedback.
I find learning online easier because it really helps me to understand more, because there are different explanations from different people. And also when we're doing homework, typing, it's easier because there are applications that correct you when you make mistakes. And also I find it fun watching videos and learning from the internet.
Thank you all for watching this edition. Follow more of these conversations on the MasterCard Foundation YouTube channel and the Young Africa Works Facebook page. My name is Moses Kemibaro. See you again in the next edition of EdTech Monday Kenya.
EdTech Mondays Kenya is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in partnership with EdTech East Africa.